A dirty orphan boy crashes a billionaire's wedding with wildflowers. The cruel bride mocks him publicly, calling him worthless. But when the groom sees the boy's face, his world shatters. This unwanted child is his own abandoned son. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. The grand ballroom sparkled like a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting rainbow lights across marble floors. White roses covered every table and golden ribbons decorated every chair. This was the wedding of the year. Victoria Sterling was marrying billionaire businessman Robert Hayes. Victoria stood in her designer dress worth more than most people's cars. Diamonds glittered around her neck and in her hair. She felt like a queen, surrounded by the richest and most powerful people in the city. Everything was perfect. The ceremony had just ended. Guests were moving to the reception area, talking and laughing. Waiters in white uniforms carried silver trays of expensive food. The air smelled of roses and champagne. Then something unexpected happened. A small figure appeared at the entrance of the ballroom. It was a boy, maybe 10 years old. His clothes were old and patched. His shoes had holes in them. His dark hair was messy and his face was dirty from the streets. In his small hands he held a bunch of wildflowers, daisies and dandelions he had picked from a park. The boy looked around nervously. He had never seen such a fancy place. The floors were so shiny he could see his reflection. The people wore clothes that cost more money than he had ever seen. But he had come here for a reason. He walked slowly through the crowd. People stared at him and whispered. Some moved away as if being poor was something they could catch. The boy kept walking until he reached the front, where the bride and groom stood greeting their guests. "Excuse me," the boy said quietly. Victoria turned around and saw him. Her smile disappeared instantly. She looked at his dirty clothes and messy hair with disgust. "What are you doing here?" she asked loudly. "This is a private party." The boy held out his small bunch of flowers. "I wanted to give you these," he said, "for your wedding. I heard people give flowers at weddings." Victoria stared at the wildflowers like they were garbage. Around them the conversation stopped. Everyone was watching now. The music seemed quieter. "You think I want those weeds?" Victoria laughed, but it wasn't a kind laugh. "Look at you. You're filthy. You smell like the streets. How did you even get in here?" The boy's face turned red. He looked down at his flowers. They suddenly seemed very small and ugly compared to all the beautiful roses around the room. "I just wanted to," he started. "You wanted to what?" Victoria cut him off. Her voice was getting louder. "Ruin my perfect wedding? Make my guests uncomfortable? Look around, child. This is not a place for people like you." Some guests nodded in agreement. Others looked uncomfortable but said nothing. A few took out their phones to record what was happening. "The flowers are pretty," the boy said quietly, trying to be brave. Victoria laughed again, even crueler this time. "Pretty? Those are weeds. Do you see the roses in this room? Each one cost more than your entire outfit. And you bring me weeds like some beggar." Tears started forming in the boy's eyes, but he didn't cry. He had learned not to cry on the streets. It only made things worse. "I'm not a beggar," he said. "No? Then what are you? Where are your parents?" "Oh wait, let me guess, you don't have any." Another orphan from the streets thinking he can crash private parties. The words hit the boy like punches. It was true, he didn't have parents. He had lived in orphanages his whole life. Different homes, different faces, but always the same feeling of not belonging anywhere. "You're dirty, you're poor, and you're unwanted," Victoria continued, her voice carrying across the silent room. "You don't belong here. Nobody wants you here. Nobody wants you anywhere." Some guests gasped at how cruel her words were. But Victoria didn't care. She was angry that this dirty child had dared to interrupt her perfect day. The boy stood there, holding his flowers, feeling smaller and smaller. He wanted to run away, but his feet felt frozen to the floor. That's when Robert Hayes, the groom, stepped forward. Robert had been talking to some business partners when he heard the commotion. He turned around to see what was happening and saw the scene unfolding. At first he was going to ask security to quietly remove the boy. But then he looked at the child's face. The boy had dark eyes, almost black. His hair was dark brown and curly, even though it was messy. There was something about the shape of his face, the way he held himself even when he was scared. Robert felt his heart skip a beat. The boy looked familiar, but that was impossible. He had never seen this child before in his life. Or had he? "What's your name, son?" Robert asked gently, walking closer. Victoria looked annoyed. "Robert, don't encourage him. Just call security." But Robert ignored his new wife. He knelt down so he was at the boy's eye level. "What's your name?" The boy looked up at him. "Tommy," he whispered. "Tommy Miller." Robert felt the blood drain from his face. Miller. That was the name of the woman he had loved 15 years ago. Sarah Miller. The woman he had left when his father threatened to cut him off from the family fortune. The woman who was pregnant when he walked away. "How old are you, Tommy?" Robert asked, his voice shaking. "I'm 11, Tommy answered. 11 years old. The math was right. Robert's hands started trembling. He looked more closely at the boy's face. The eyes were Sarah's eyes. But the shape of the nose, the line of the jaw, that was all Robert. Who was your mother, Tommy?" Tommy's face became sad. "Sarah Miller. She died when I was born. I never knew my father. The people at the orphanage said he left before I was born." The ballroom had become completely silent. Even the waiters had stopped moving. Everyone was watching this strange conversation between the billionaire groom and the poor boy. Robert felt like the world was spinning around him. This was his son. His child. The baby he had abandoned 15 years ago because he was young and scared and cared more about money than love. "Oh God," Robert whispered, tears filling his eyes. "Oh God, Tommy." Victoria was getting impatient. "Robert, what's wrong with you? Get rid of this child so we can continue our reception." But Robert wasn't listening to her anymore. He was looking at his son, the son he never knew existed, the son he had abandoned without even knowing it. "Sarah died?" he asked quietly. Tommy nodded. "In the hospital when I was born. The doctors tried to save her, but they couldn't. I never got to meet her." Robert closed his eyes. Sarah was dead. The woman he had loved and left was gone, and she had died giving birth to his child. His child had grown up alone in orphanages, never knowing who his father was. "Tommy," Robert said, his voice breaking. "I'm your father." The words fell into the silent room like stones into still water. People gasped. Someone dropped a glass and it shattered on the marble floor. Victoria's face went white. "What?" she whispered. Tommy looked confused. But you can't be. My father left. He didn't want me." Robert felt his heart breaking. "I didn't know, son. I swear I didn't know your mother was pregnant. If I had known." He stopped. If he had known, would he have stayed? He wanted to believe he would have, but he wasn't sure. "You're lying," Victoria said, her voice high and scared. "This is some kind of trick." But Robert looked at Tommy again and he knew it was true. This was his son. His flesh and blood. The child who had been living on the streets while Robert lived in mansions. The child who had just wanted to bring flowers to a wedding. "I'm not lying," Robert said, standing up. "This is my son." The guests started talking all at once. Voices rose and fell like ocean waves. Cameras flashed. Someone was probably already posting this on social media. Victoria grabbed Robert's arm. "This is insane. It's our wedding day. You can't just claim some random street child as your son." "He's not random," Robert said quietly. "Look at him, Victoria. Really look at him." Victoria looked at Tommy and for the first time she saw what Robert saw. The resemblance was clear once you knew what to look for. The boy had Robert's chin, Robert's hands, Robert's way of standing with his shoulders straight even when he was scared. "No," Victoria whispered. "No, this can't be happening." But it was happening. Robert knelt down again and gently took the flowers from Tommy's hands. "These are beautiful," he said. "Thank you for bringing them." Tommy looked up at him with wonder. "You really think they're pretty?" "They're the most beautiful flowers I've ever seen," Robert said, and he meant it. "Because they came from your heart." Victoria watched in horror as her perfect wedding fell apart. All around them, guests were talking and pointing. Some were leaving. Others were taking pictures. The story would be in the newspapers tomorrow. Billionaire discovers son at wedding reception. "I can't believe this," Victoria said, but her voice sounded different now. Smaller. Less sure of herself. Robert looked at her and for the first time he really saw who she was. He saw her cruelty, her selfishness, her cold heart. How had he never noticed before? "You called my son dirty and unwanted," Robert said quietly. "I didn't know he was your son. Does that matter? He was just a child trying to do something kind. And you humiliated him in front of everyone." Victoria's face was red now. She could feel people staring at her, judging her. Minutes ago, she had been the beautiful bride, the center of attention for all the right reasons. Now she was the woman who had been cruel to a child. "Robert, please," she said. "We can work this out. We just got married. This doesn't have to change anything." But Robert was already shaking his head. "It changes everything." He turned to Tommy. Would you like to come home with me? Tommy's eyes grew wide. Home? You mean, live with you? If you want to. I know I haven't been there for you before, but I want to try now. I want to be your father if you'll let me. Tommy looked around the fancy ballroom at all the rich people in their expensive clothes. Then he looked back at Robert. What about her? He asked, pointing at Victoria. Robert looked at his bride, his wife of less than 2 hours. I think she and I need to have a very long conversation. Victoria realized what was happening. You can't leave me. Not at our own wedding. Think about what people will say. I'm thinking about what's right, Robert said. And what's right is taking care of my son. He stood up and took Tommy's hand. Come on, son. Let's go home. As they walked toward the door, the crowd parted to let them through. Some people were crying. Others were smiling. A few even clapped. Victoria stood alone in her expensive dress, surrounded by wilting roses and broken dreams. Her perfect wedding had become her worst nightmare. At the door, Robert stopped and turned back to look at the room. Ladies and gentlemen, he said loudly enough for everyone to hear, thank you for coming to witness the most important moment of my life, the day I found my son. And then he walked out, holding Tommy's hand, leaving behind his new wife, his old life, and a room full of shocked guests. Outside, in the cool evening air, Tommy looked up at Robert. Are you really my father? Robert smiled through his tears. Yes, son. I really am. And I'm sorry it took me so long to find you. Tommy smiled back. It's okay. I found you first. They got into Robert's car and drove away from the hotel, toward a new life together. Behind them, the wedding reception continued without the groom, but nobody stayed very long. There wasn't much point in celebrating anymore. In the newspapers the next day, the headline read, Wedding Crasher turns out to be groom's long-lost son. But that wasn't the real story. The real story was about a boy who brought flowers to strangers and a man who finally learned what was truly important in life. And somewhere, Sarah Miller's spirit was finally at peace, knowing that her son had found his father at last.